It is just after 2 in the morning over eastern Pakistan, and 2 stealth helicopters are sliding through the dark with their lights off, hugging the ground to stay invisible. Inside sit roughly 24 of the most highly trained commandos on Earth.
Their target is a single-walled house in a sleeping town, the place where the world's most wanted man has hidden in plain sight for years. Over the next 38 minutes, a 10-year manhunt will finally end. This is Operation Neptune's Spear, minute by minute.
First, the man they hunted and the 10 years he spent as a ghost.
On September 11th, 2001, Osama bin Laden became the face of the deadliest terror attack in history, the murder of nearly 3,000 people in a single morning. Overnight, the leader of Al-Qaeda became the most wanted man on the planet, with a $25 million bounty on his head.
The United States toppled the Taliban government that had sheltered him and poured troops into Afghanistan to hunt him down.
By December, they had him cornered in the caves of Tora Bora, high in the snow-blown mountains near the Pakistani border. American bombs pounded the ridgelines for days as he was pinned in the rock. And then, somehow, he slipped through the lines and vanished into Pakistan.
For nearly 10 years, the most powerful intelligence services on Earth would chase a man who had simply disappeared.
The trail went cold. There were no phone calls to trace, no emails to intercept, no radio signal to triangulate. Bin Laden had gone completely off the grid, passing every order by hand through a tiny circle of trusted couriers. To find the man, the CIA realized they would first have to find his messenger.
For years, detainees had whispered about one figure, a courier who went by a single alias, Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti. He was described as bin Laden's shadow, his one living thread to the outside world. Find the courier, the analysts reasoned, and he will lead you straight to the man.
It took years just to put a real name to the alias. Then, one day, an old contact of the courier's let something slip on a monitored phone line. The CIA had a voice and a phone, and for the first time in a long time, a thread worth pulling.
In the summer of 2010, the break finally came. Tracking the courier's white SUV, agents followed it as it wound for hours through the streets of Pakistan, north and inland, mile after mile. Then the car turned off the road in a quiet city called Abbottabad and disappeared through a heavy steel gate.
The gate guarded a compound unlike anything around it. 3 stories of bare concrete stood behind walls 18 feet high, crowned with barbed wire. There was no phone line and no internet, and the people inside burned their own garbage rather than set it out on the street. It had cost $250,000 to build, yet it had been built less like a home than a fortress.
Stranger still, it sat barely a mile from Pakistan's elite military academy, in a town full of retired generals. For months, the CIA watched it from a rented house nearby, mapping every door, window, and routine.
On the top floor lived a family that never came out, and a tall man who paced the garden behind the walls for hours each day, never once lifting his face to the sky. The analysts nicknamed him the Pacer.
But they could never get a clear look at his face, and they could never photograph him leaving. Inside the agency, the estimates of whether this was really bin Laden ranged wildly, from near certainty all the way down to a coin flip. Almost certain, in the end, was not the same as certain.
Now the choice fell to one man in Washington.
Inside the White House, every option on the table was bad. They could level the compound with a bomb, but that would erase the body they needed to identify and kill everyone inside, women and children included. They could ask Pakistan for help, but if word leaked, their target would vanish all over again.
Or they could send their own men in on the ground deep into an ally's country, with no warning and no permission.
Everyone in the room remembered the ghosts of raids gone wrong.
the burning helicopters of the failed Iran rescue, and the bodies dragged through Mogadishu. If this went the same way, American troops could die or be captured deep inside Pakistan, and the fallout would be catastrophic.
When the president went around the room, his advisors were split right down the middle.
The plan they settled on was audacious. Fly in 2 helicopters built to be nearly invisible to radar, land in the courtyard, and be gone before Pakistan could even scramble a response. On April 29, 2011, President Barack Obama made his decision. Quietly, he gave the order to send in the SEALs.
The men chosen were from SEAL Team 6, the Navy's most secretive special missions unit, operators who answered to no ordinary chain of command. For weeks, they had rehearsed on full-scale replicas of the compound built in the deserts of North Carolina and Nevada.
They ran the raid again and again, in daylight and in darkness, until every wall and stairwell lived in muscle memory. Most of them were not even told whose house it was until the final days.
The raid was set for the last weekend of April, then held one more day as fog rolled over the valley. On the afternoon of May 1st, at 22 minutes past 1, the final word came down the chain. The mission was a go.
At last, the night came.
From a base in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, 2 specially modified stealth Blackhawks lifted off into the night, flown by the Army's finest night aviators, the Night Stalkers. On board rode the SEAL assault team, a CIA interpreter, and a combat dog named Cairo, trained to chase down anyone who tried to run.
Heavier Chinook helicopters trailed behind and held in reserve, waiting just across the border with fuel and a quick reaction force.
They flew low and silent, threading along the ridgelines to slip beneath Pakistani radar. For 90 tense minutes, they crossed enemy airspace completely undetected. Ahead in the valley, the scattered lights of Abbottabad began to glow in the dark. The target was minutes away.
3:30 in the morning. The 2 Blackhawks swept in over the compound, the plan simple. Flare hard, hover above the courtyard, and drop the SEALs straight down on ropes. In a Washington situation room 9 time zones away, the president and his team leaned toward a screen, watching a thin gray drone feed of the rooftops below.
But the high walls trapped the hot night air inside the courtyard, and the first helicopter's rotors found no grip. The lift betrayed them, and the Black Hawk began to sink toward the wall. The pilot fought it down into a hard, grinding landing, the tail rotor clipping the concrete, yet he kept every man alive.
40 seconds into the raid, the plan had already broken. The SEALs did not hesitate. They poured out of the crippled helicopter as the second Black Hawk, seeing the crash, set its own team down cleanly just outside the walls. Within seconds, the whole assault force was on the ground and moving as one toward the main house.
By 3:33, they had blown through the gates and doors with explosives, one barrier after another. In the guest house just inside, the courier who had unknowingly led them there opened fire from a doorway and was cut down in the exchange. The man whose single phone call had cracked the case was the first to fall.
By 3:35, the SEALs were clearing the main house room by room. On the lower floors they found families, women and children, and moved them out of the line of fire. This was not just a hideout, it was a home full of the terror leader's relatives, and not yet the man they had come for.
They reached the central staircase and began to climb toward the upper floors, where the pacer was said to live. At 3:37, in the darkness of the stairwell, one of bin Laden's grown sons rushed down toward them and was shot. Floor by floor they pushed upward, weapons raised, every landing a possible.
By 3:39, only one floor remained, the third. Across the top landing hung a heavy curtain, and behind it was the room they had crossed the world to reach. The SEALs braced themselves, half expecting one more dead end. Then they pushed through the curtain.
In the shadows at the end of the room stood a tall, lean, bearded figure in a loose tunic. It was a face the world had not seen in years, the face from 100 grainy videos, Osama bin Laden.
Two of his wives stepped in front of him, and in the chaos, one rushed the seals and was shot in the leg. The most hunted man on earth had nowhere left to run.
In an instant, it was over. Less than 15 minutes after the SEALs first touched down, the most wanted man in the world was dead, and not a single American had been killed. The lead SEAL keyed his radio and spoke the words a nation had waited a decade to hear. Geronimo, enemy killed in action.
Thousands of miles away, the Situation Room had watched in near silence. When the words came through, no one cheered. The president simply said, "We got him," and then they waited, because they still had to prove it was him.
The man was dead. The hard part was getting out alive.
By 3:55, the SEALs had moved the body downstairs, photographed his face, and taken samples for DNA. Then they tore through the compound for intelligence, filling bags with hard drives, documents, phones, and computer disks. It would prove to be the largest single haul of terror intelligence ever captured in one place.
The clock was now their enemy. They restrained the surviving women and children and left them for the Pakistani forces who would soon arrive. Overhead, the minutes were ticking down before a neighbor's call could bring the Pakistani army down on them.
At 4:05, the working helicopter lifted off low over the rooftops, carrying the body and the intelligence. But the stealth Black Hawk that had crashed on landing could not fly, and its secret radar-defeating technology could not be left for the world to study. So at 4:08, the SEALs wired it with explosives and blew it apart, leaving only a scorched tail section against the wall.
A reserve Chinook swept in to scoop up the remaining men, and the helicopters turned for the border. They had been on the ground for just 38 minutes. A 10-year hunt had ended in less time than it takes to watch this video.
The ride home took more than an hour and a half, longer than twice the raid itself, as the sky over the mountains began to lighten. Pausing once on Pakistani soil to refuel from a waiting helicopter, they slipped back across the border into Afghanistan. Only then, safely back on friendly ground, could the men finally breathe.
Now came the question that had haunted everyone. Was it really him? Facial recognition analysis and a first DNA test came back with a match of well over 99%. After 10 years, the United States finally had its man, and the president could tell the world.
His body was flown to the deck of a United States aircraft carrier in the North Arabian Sea. There it was, washed and wrapped in white according to Islamic custom, and religious words were read over it.
Then, weighted and shrouded, it was tilted from aboard and slipped into the ocean, buried at sea on purpose, so that no grave on land could ever become a shrine.
Late on the night of May 1st, American time, President Obama stepped before the cameras. Tonight, he told the nation the United States had carried out an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda. Within minutes, crowds were pouring into the streets outside the White House, chanting and waving flags into the dark.
A 10-year hunt, a 38-minute raid, and the most wanted man in history was gone. Found in the end not in a cave but in a city, hiding in plain sight. The operation would echo for years, in declassified files, in best-selling memoirs, and in a Hollywood film, in arguments that have never fully settled.
For more true stories of the operations that changed the world minute by minute, subscribe and stay curious.